The most important work of your life is the work you do within your soul. This is Home Improvement for the Soul.
Hello, and welcome to Home Improvement for the Soul. I'm Maddie Cheers, and I am here today with our special guest, Bob Vetter. Bob is a healer and an anthropologist. He's an instructor for children in cultural arts programs, and he's my husband. He has a very interesting story about how he got to be here, how he got to do the things he's doing. So I'd actually like to start this series of podcasts with him telling you a little bit about himself. Bob.
Well, my story begins early on in childhood, where I had an early interest in spirituality, alternative spirituality, at a time that it was not quite as common as it is today. So as a kid in junior high school, back in the 60s, I was practicing yoga and meditation at a time where other kids my age certainly weren't. So I was interested in alternative spirituality from an early age because religion didn't seem to hold any of the answers that I was personally looking for. So I became interested in Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism in high school and in junior high. And when I went on to college, I studied anthropology with a philosophy minor. And I like to say that the philosophy part of it represented the ideal, and anthropology represented the real. So both of them are fields of inquiry where we try to understand ourselves and try to understand humanity. While I was in college, I went to India, and I guess I would say learned a lot while I was there about Hinduism as it's practiced. So really, my area of interest within anthropology, cultural anthropology, was the intersection of spirituality and healing, which seems like a very obvious thing right now, but at the time that was kind of unusual. That was not something that people generally thought of, that you would put those two together. But I was interested in that and thought that I would do my field work in Asia, in South Asia, or perhaps Bali. So I began on that track. I thought I was going to go to a program at the East-West Center at the University of Hawaii, but I was rejected from that program, and I thought I would just take some time off and then eventually go on to grad school. But at the last minute, I was accepted into a program because of a mentor, Dr. Ashok Malhotra, who interestingly enough wrote Maddie's preface to her book that just came out. At any rate, he was my professor and my advisor, and he told me that there was a professor also from India who was teaching at the University of Oklahoma, and he was looking for a promising young graduate student. So at the last minute, I ended up going to the University of Oklahoma, which was a strange choice, but I went because I had a full assistantship there. So I was admitted into the philosophy department. I moved out to Oklahoma, enrolled in classes, and I literally hated every single class that I was in. The professors were not at all like what I was used to, and I just didn't enjoy it at all.
So one of the reasons I wanted you to tell this story is that we're looking at a lot of this happening with our young people today. Religion is not holding answers for them. They are not interested in going to college. It's too expensive. They don't know what they want to study. They sit with a professor that seems like they're out of touch with them. And I think I know that to young people, it always looks like this is the first thing that ever happened, and the first time it ever happened is to them. But that's why I was really interested in having you go on and tell people how this very sort of negative experience turned into something fantastic and informed the rest of your life.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know that it always happens that way, but for me, my life has seemed to take many interesting turns, not as a result of my own planning,
right?
But almost like there was a hand behind it moving things in a particular way.
It's like John Lennon said, right? Life is what happens to you while you're waiting for your plans to work out.
True. And I can't tell you whether I think that it's destiny or whether it is the way that as a human being we have the capacity to make meaning out of something that seems random.
Right.
It doesn't matter. There's the synchronicity to it, whether we impose it, whether there's an outside force. I really couldn't tell you. Sometimes it seems like one to me, sometimes it seems like the other. So at any rate, I found myself at the University of Oklahoma, hated everything that I was taking, and I was really, my plan was the day that I made my decision to leave, I was going to pack up everything that was in my office there, go back to my apartment, and just drive back to New York and just give up. And for some reason, I walked from the philosophy department. The anthropology department was in the same building. So I walked into the anthropology department just to kind of check it out and see who was there. And I met with the department chairman. And I explained to him my situation and how I couldn't stand philosophy and just wanted to know what was the deal in the anthropology department. And he ended up making me like an unbelievable offer. He said, we will match the assistantship, the full assistantship that you have in the philosophy department. We'll match that in the anthropology department. The only catch is that you'll have to teach introduction to anthropology. Now, this was kind of daunting to me because I was literally going to go from being an undergrad to teaching undergrads. And it's not like when you go to college, there's somebody who's going to stand there and teach you how to teach.
Right. And I think that what's so vital in this part of the story is sometimes you just got to look around. Sometimes you got to be open and aware and paying attention when the universe puts something in front of you. Instead, it's just always been so interesting to me that you were just about to quit and then this opportunity presents itself. And the only reason that you found a way to work with it was because you're you and you decided to do it. So
I didn't find out until, I don't know, months and months later how this whole thing fell together. It turned out that somebody was teaching Introduction to Anthropology and walked out on it the day before. So he didn't tell me, the department chairman never told me that they were desperate that day to find somebody to teach Introduction to Anthropology. So,
worked out for everybody.
Yeah, I just walked into it. So, I had to figure out how to teach anthropology, how to teach in general, how to organize my lectures, how to do the whole thing. So in the meantime, it was too late in the semester for me to enroll in classes because too much time had elapsed.
And that was also a blessing.
That was also a blessing, yeah, because what they did, what my advisor said was, well, we're kind of in a catch-22. You have to be a full-time student in order to receive the assistantship, but it's too late for you to enroll in regular classroom classes. So what they decided was that they would enroll me in independent study. And because my interest was cultural anthropology, I would do ethnographic research. Now, a little bit of technical information here. Cultural anthropology is divided up into two areas. One is ethnography, one is ethnology. So ethnography is where you go into the field and you learn about a particular culture through something called participant observation. So you are participating in the culture to the best extent that you can, while you also sort of take a step back and try to look at it objectively.
Right.
Ethnology is the branch of cultural anthropology where you take a topic and you study it cross-culturally based on the field work that other people have done. So I was going to do ethnography. And since my area of interest, as I said, was the intersection of spirituality and healing, the topic that I chose was medicine. And since I found myself at the University of Oklahoma, which, for those who don't know it, Oklahoma is the home of 39 different tribes or federally recognized tribes. It has more cultural diversity than any other state in the United States. So since I found myself there, my thought was, I'll try to find a medicine man. I'll learn about that, and I'll use that as one cultural exploration of the major topic that I'm interested in, which is spirituality and healing. And then I'll go back to Asia or pursue other parts of the world. I thought it was just going to be a touchstone. So I didn't know how to begin, but I met with an advisor who had been doing field work among the Kiowa Apache or Plains Apache people for his entire lifetime. He was an old man at the time.
Now, one of the things I wanted to bring up here is that there's a lot of talk about how to deal with cultures, how to look at cultures, and maybe people outside of a culture shouldn't be looking at other cultures. But, of course, to us, that seems rather ridiculous. So what is the value? I mean, if you could just explain what you saw then as a student, as a young student, and what you know now of the value of studying other cultures, being with people who come from other cultures, because right now we're so worried about whether or not we're going to offend that some schools are getting rid of cultural anthropology altogether. So I wonder if you could just speak to that for a moment.
Well, first I'll address my own motivation in the beginning. My motivation personally was that I felt that there was zero value in my own culture. Honestly, that in growing up, that was my attitude.
Yeah.
And I looking back on it, I threw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
But
a lot of that's going on right now.
But at the time, that was the way I looked at it, was that there is zero of value in the culture that I am growing up in. Therefore, I will look to other cultures to find some meaning and purpose and value in my life.
Right.
So it was a selfish thing. It was me trying to learn about myself, about the world, about everything,
right,
through the lens of another culture. Now, having said that, I'm in a very different place right now in my life.
Well, how old were you when that happened?
I was 18.
18.
No, not 18. Sorry, 21.
21.
Graduate school.
Right, and now you're 65. So you're supposed to be in a different place, which is good. Go.
But but here's the point. The point is that now that I look back on the value of cultural anthropology, the argument against it is that cultural anthropology is it's a tool of imperialism, that it is a way that the dominant society had of going in and considering native people to be something interesting to put under a microscope.
Right.
Now, there has been a lot that has been said by native people, by Native Americans in particular, American Indians, who didn't like the fact that anthropologists would come and study them. So there's a song, Here Come the Anthros, by Floyd Westerman, that talks about how in the summer, years ago, that Indian people on various reservations would dread the fact that summer was the time when anthropology students would go out into the field to study them.
Right.
And it led to kind of a bad attitude toward anthropologists in general. But then no smaller figure than Vine Deloria Jr., who was a genius, an absolute genius Native American scholar, who earlier in his life had been very, very critical of anthropology and anthropologists, toward the end of his life had a 180-degree change in his outlook and came to see anthropologists as people who could work with Native people, who were in a position to create positive social change, that they were largely people who cared about the Native people
Right.
that they were with and could be allies to their causes. And what I like to say is that, when it comes to understanding any Native North American cultures, we know what happens when there is a lack of understanding.
Right.
Now, the lack of understanding is largely on the part of the non-native people not understanding native people. It's not the other way around.
Right. True.
So we know what happens when these two groups don't understand each other. What we don't know, what we don't really have a precedent for, is how things can be different if they do understand each other, if they do sit shoulder to shoulder and care about one another and discover a common humanity.
And I think that's happened throughout the history of cultural anthropology in many different ways, where the anthropologists have been a part of helping the cultures that they're working with and becoming a bridge between the dominant culture and the culture of native people. And I think that is why it is so important that what you just said is where we need to come to within our own culture. We need to come to that realization that we need to sit down with each other and attempt to understand. Whether you're looking at it, I mean, I do look at it through a cultural lens, the culture of the youth culture, the culture of the woke culture, the culture of the right wing, the culture of the left wing. We all need to come together and figure out where our common ground is so that we can build a more cohesive society in general and a more loving society, and a society that's equal and fair and just for everybody.
Well, and certainly cultural anthropology has a way to do that.
Oh, yes.
Now, what I will say about it is that I agree that if you look at the origins of cultural anthropology, there was a tremendous amount of underlying ethnocentrism.
Right.
There was the whole idea of cultural evolution, the early meaning of cultural evolution, or it's called unilinear evolution, cultural evolution, which is the idea that everybody goes through a series of stages. And it was all leading up to modern civilization being the pinnacle. And any native culture that you could find in the world is just a throwback. They're eventually making their way towards that pinnacle. Now, fortunately, that has long been abandoned. And anthropology today is certainly a very different discipline than it was, let's say, in the early 1900s, basically 100 years ago. So anthropology has matured, and I like to think that the people going into it have a different profile today. And that's not to say that there aren't anthropologists as individuals who are terrible people, just like in anything else.
Anything.
But as a discipline, it is providing us with information. And I mean, for example, if you want to talk about the value of anthropology, anthropologists have been going out into the field to collect cultural data. And that data, in some cases, was collected at a time that things were disappearing.
Right.
So even native people themselves today will sometimes turn back to what early anthropologists said in their going into the field and collecting lots of information, lots of texts that are still useful and usable today.
Well, one of your mentors, relatives, one of your Cheyenne relatives, didn't he go back? What was his name? Willie Fletcher. Right. He went back into some of those old records, right, so that he could reconstruct some things.
Yes, because let's face it, during the time that native North American cultures were largely being destroyed from the outside, it was the government and the churches that were behind the intentional destruction of these cultures. Anthropologists were the ones who were trying to salvage what they could, because pretty much across the board, everybody figured these cultures will fail to exist.
Right.
So we need to collect this data now while we can. Now, while it didn't turn out that way at all, thank goodness, it still is a way that we have of preserving the information as the cultures were lived at that time.
Right, and I think I really think that the relationship between the good-hearted anthropologists today and in the past and Native Americans is so important, because it is a model for how people who come from completely different backgrounds can work together to help each other. And now we're so interested in the healing ways that come from Native and indigenous cultures all over the world, because we're realizing that, this what we call conventional medicine stuff hasn't been working for us too well. And there are other things that we can turn to. And that knowledge has been kept by the records of some anthropologists and by the people themselves that have managed to hand down this knowledge through their lineages. So that leads us today for you to please tell us what you're working on now and how you ended up through this whole story of your background, how this led to what you do now.
That's a lot to work through in a minute, so I'll try to.
So
I'll do the best job
I'll give
that I
you
can.
more than a minute.
Okay, all right.
You get special treatment.
So my advisor, to get back to the story, my advisor told me that I would have to go out into the field and I would have to use a networking approach to meet people, and eventually, maybe I would be able to meet a medicine man. Now I thought he would just introduce me.
Right.
But no. And this, by the way, this would never happen today in any institution, because they never just send you out into the field blindly.
Right.
For a variety of very good reasons. But at the time, that was the way that it was done. So we're talking 1980 now.
Wow. Man world.
So I went out into the field. To make a long story short, I eventually met a man named Oliver Patapony, who was the last medicine man of the Comanche people. And I interviewed him. I learned a lot from him. And in the process, he adopted me into his family. He made me his grandson. And being with him, being a part of that family, when I finished my graduate work at the University of Oklahoma, and I looked back at the time that I had spent there, I realized that that was more meaningful to me and more a learning experience than everything that I had done in all of the classes that I had been in. So to zip my way all the way forward to the present, I continued to pursue this topic. I continued to go out and network in Native communities. I was adopted into a number of other families, a Caddo family, a Cheyenne family, and a Caddo, a Kiowa, and a Cheyenne family, and continued my learning and understanding of ceremonialism and traditional Native American spirituality. At the same time that all of that was happening while I was in graduate school, I also developed an interest in curanderismo, which is the traditional medicine of Mesoamerica, or what we know as Mexico, Guatemala, Nicaragua, that entire region. And I started out with an academic interest in it, and eventually came to study curanderismo with teachers both in Mexico and in the United States. Out of that, and out of my studies of non-Western healing practices around the world, eventually I developed an understanding of how traditional healing works.
And I think what is so important for our listeners to understand in the world in general, that these elder healers that we work with, these mentors that we work with from different cultures, these people see this medicine as universal. Our friend Laurencio Nunez, who's one of your teachers, said, he was asked the question, why do you share this medicine? Why are you sharing with people who are not Mexican? And his answer was, because this is universal medicine. This is medicine from the Creator. And it was the same thing. I always go back to that wonderful statement that Tom Porter made once when he was talking about the Great Law of Peace. And one of his own Mohawk people stood up and said, why are you teaching them all of our secrets? Why are you telling them this? And Tom's answer is my favorite ever, as you well know. Did the Creator make the water just for the Mohawks? Did the Creator make the sky just for the Mohawk? And then he just turned around and walked away. And this is very important for us, I believe, to understand, because if you are outside of a culture, don't judge for them what you think is best for them. Go find out. Go talk to people and go with an open heart and an open mind. All this judgment, all this criticism that we're seeing, this is what's causing the divisions, I believe, and you believe, that we see throughout our country, throughout our world, is not what all the Native people that we know, this is not what they want. So I wanted to, but I don't want to speak for them either. I want to say, you go talk to people, go find out, go find the elders, go talk to them. But I just want to wrap up here with asking you what you would like to say to our audience about the experience of being and working with other cultures and about becoming a healer. So let's hear that.
Well, I mean, I can't really speak to how other people do it or should do it. I can just say that in my own life that I feel that it was important for me to learn everything slowly, to not get it overnight, to not think that I would go through a weekend workshop and be able to do anything as a healer. You know, it was a slow and gradual process of learning about ceremonialism, learning about healing practices, healing the things in myself that needed to be healed, in order to even have any idea of how to be able to work with another person. So it's a personal journey. To use the term that Carl Jung popularized, the wounded healer concept.
Right.
The idea that anybody who has an interest in healing practices without even realizing it is trying to heal him or herself. And that through doing one, you do the other. Through healing others, you heal yourself. Through healing yourself, you're in a greater capacity to be able to help other people.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important for our listeners, for anybody, to really take a look at what is going on in their own lives, to make that inner journey, and also to find people around them that can help them, to not think you have to do this alone. So, Bob, please give us all your contact info, and we'll wrap it up here.
Sure. So anybody listening out there, if you'd like to go to my website, there's lots of free stuff on there that I think that you'll enjoy. There's a free game download called Sustos that perhaps we'll talk about in a different podcast episode. There are
Yes, we will. Previews of coming attractions.
There are articles that I wrote, and you'll be able to access directly my podcast, which is called Healing and Spirituality in World Cultures. And you could find all of it at my website, which is www.bobvetter.com. That's with T's,
Vetter,
not
right.
D's. So it's BOBVETTER.com.
Wonderful. And thank you so much for being with us this week. And out there, as you know, I'm going to go and close this podcast with a poem. These poems that I receive from the divine. And this one is Full Moon, is what it's called. It was written on a full moon. And since we are still in that energy, that power of that brilliant and beautiful blue moon from last night, the biggest supermoon of the year, I thought this would be a good one to wrap it up with. Through darkened skies and moonlit nights, we sing the song of earth's delights. We sing on high, we sing to know the depths to which the heart can go. To know this sacred winding path, we need to take the spirit bath. By bathing in the light divine, we find we can traverse the time that opens gates and closes doors on those whose ways are nevermore. The gates we open leave behind, the ancient way of love is blind. For love is not a sightless thing. It raises us and gives us wings, so we can see in darkened light and never lost in endless night. We fly above the fear and pain and reach a realm where we regain a place beside Creator's throne, a throne of love whose ways have grown to lead an evolution here, evolving from what we fear. And liars have no place to stance, for they are known to take a chance with all existence on this earth, denying all their rightful birth. We're born into a realm of light, and love and truth will set us right. If blinded by the words you hear, then stuck you'll be inside your fear. Reach out beyond the ways of man. Reach far beyond the yes, I can. Reach out beyond the simple mind. Reach into hearts that are so kind, who know the way and walk it true. They are the ones who can lead you. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We hope you'll join us next week for part 2 with Bob Vetter, when we are going to talk about working with others, how to apply the things that we're talking of, the things that you may need to know to even work with yourself. So I wish you all a beautiful and wonderful, full of wonder and fun week. Thank you, everybody. See you soon.
Thank you for joining us for Home Improvement for the Soul. If you'd like more information, please go to womensoneness.com or maddiecheers.com. That's womensoneness.com or maddiecheers.com. See you on the next episode.